I'm the guy with the gun.
Hello there, fellow gaming geeks. I am going to show you how I make barbed wire obstacles, because you're going to need those for your games, right? Right. Plus it just looks cool. So there's going to be two different kinds. There's going to be your, hold on. And the two types of wire I will be making are thus. We'll have Spanish riders. Hopefully that's in focus. This is my second round doing this one because the last one was not in focus. And so these were just made up from either wood or angle iron, like L-shaped angle iron. And they're just sort of armatures to make a movable wire obstacle that troops could just settle into whatever area that they wanted or pick it up, move it out of the way. At which time they would be sort of joined together and made not movable, but anyway. So there's this one, and I choose to put them on individual bases so that you can put a bunch of them together, or they can go over hills or around corners or whatever. Or you can put destroyed sections in and it just looks cooler. And then the other version is going to be, again I hope we have focus here, the other version is going to be this double apron wire obstacle. And again, it'll be done in sections so that you can customize it to your gaming table, whatever the game is. And also you can choose if you want to put a blown up section in. If that gets destroyed, you have the option to do that. And they're pretty easy to handle. You just pick them up from the ends and then you don't have to touch any of the actual wire. The first step is to make these plastic rods look like wood. So I'm just going to use a basic number 11 X-Acto knife. And here, we'll push all this shit out of the way. And I'm just going to randomly just start carving in some grooves, and I'm going to do it along the full length of the this, and I'm going to do it all in one long piece instead of doing each individual piece, because that would just be the way of the wank and it would take forever. So yeah, I'm just being very random here and making it look a lot like wood. Or like I said, you can just use actual wood, but I'm going to carve little notches in the pieces for the the established sort of barbed wire entanglement. The little notches are going to be what I crazy glue my wire in. Yeah, I'm just going to cut those notches in with like a hobby saw, or I use a jeweler saw often. Once you've carved up your plastic rod, I should say, not stick, I go over it with some fairly rough sandpaper first, just in one direction, like lengthwise down the stick, and you'll start to, it's going to take some of the extreme edges off of your carved in pieces, or portions, but it's also going to start to look like a bit of a wood grain. We're going to make the wood texture by just running the saw blade and spinning the stick here, or we keep calling it a stick. It's not a stick, it's a piece of plastic rod. And once you spin it, it'll give you a less uniform wood texture. And over top of your little grooves that you've cut in, it's going to look fairly fairly convincing, especially in the scale. And it's just nice because then you're not having to use super glue. You can just use regular model glue. Sometimes super glue is okay, but if you want to make like unditching logs to jam on the side of your Russian tanks or whatever, you can just use stuff like this instead of trying to find the appropriate diameter of wood. I mean, sometimes it looks better and more natural if you can find like the right kind of twig or piece of root or something. But if you want to just fire one up in plastic that looks convincing once it's painted, this is the way to go. So I'm just making my grooves and just taking off the extra bits. And it's a pretty fast, and I might add, it's a bit satisfying. It's always satisfying to make cool shit in small scale. Lots of spinning will get you lots of different textures. And I'm just going to go around and give this a fairly good chop up. And when this will really shine is when you go to paint it, obviously. So I don't know if I'll be able to get a very good close-up of that. It doesn't seem to want to focus. What a dick. So what I'll do is just take a photo of it at some point. I'm going to do, and we'll talk about files. A good thing to have if you're going to be a hobbyist is an assortment of needle files. What I'm going to do for the Spanish riders, I don't know if you can see because it's so far away, but I've just marked in the center of this. Is it going to focus or no? Nah, sorry guys, this one won't want to focus. But I've just marked the center of these, and I'm just going to go through on one piece, so half of them, 8 of them, there's 16 in total. I'm just going to use my round nose file and just file in a small groove so that when I glue them together, it's going to be strong. It's not going to be like this flimsy, there's going to be a bit of a joint there. You don't really need to, but again, it'll just make it stronger. I think in real life, they just pretty crudely just hammered the two shits together with some nails and fired it up, right? So you could skip that step, but I've done it before just gluing them, and it's kind of tricky to keep them at a right angle, like nice and square, because you're going to make like X's with these. So I will do that, and I'll glue the riders together. Actually, I thought I would show you this this little filing. So I've marked the center just because it's easier to pick it up and then trying to like guess with the file. And I just eyeballed my mark. I didn't like measure it. I just eyeballed it. Yeah, it just needs to be rough. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it's still easier to mark it than to try and gauge where the center is and then to start filing. So I just start to file a groove. And remember, files only cut in one direction. So if you're going back and forth, when you're going back, take the pressure off. Your files won't get dull as quickly that way because a file actually cuts material. It's not like an abrasive like sandpaper. So you just pretty much get your file action in one direction. And because this file is sort of like dart shaped, you have to file it from both directions, otherwise you'll have a wide end and a narrow end. So flip it over and give it a file, and then you have your groove in place, and then when you get your second piece to make the end, it's just going to fit in there and it'll glue much easier. I basically just put a dab of the liquid glue in the groove that I made, and then I've jammed this piece in and see how nicely they fit together. And then here's another tool I find very useful as a set square, especially for terrain building and cutting. I just put it in to make sure it's roughly square, and that's good enough. Yeah, we just set it aside and let it dry. And then once I get all of the end pieces, I'm just going to glue these in. Before we glue the posts in to the double apron things, I'm going to cut or saw little grooves in so that when I go to glue the wire on, it will actually stick in those little grooves a bit. So I've just marked these off. I'll put a picture up, a close-up of these, but I just by eye, so maybe about 2 millimeters from the bottom, little less than 1 millimeter from the top, and then I just do one in the middle. And then we're going to get our fine super saw here and just give it like a couple quick passes. And then your barbed wire will have something, you know, to glue into once you get to that stage. Like I said, this is a bit more time consuming, but for sure it's going to look cool once they're done. Ooh, that one's a little more difficult to do. This is actually like a little mini hacksaw where the saw teeth are pointing forward. I would use the jeweler's saw, but I think this blade is a bit thicker and I want a bit thicker cut. So while these little X's are drying off for the Spanish riders, I'm going to work on the bases for the double apron barbed wire. So I'm just going to use one that I already made as a measuring device for the next one. So we're not like spending a whole hell of a lot of time measuring. You know, we're just going to eyeball it and again, I think that's kind of true to form. I don't think people would have been too anal about this, but you never know. Heinrich, your barbed wire posts are 2 millimeters off. What is the matter with you? Ha ha. So I'm just going to divide this in half. It looks like it's 46 mil, so half of that would be 23. I'm drilling holes for my posts, and they're just shallow holes. They're just enough so that when I glue it in, again, it's not just a butt joint, there's actually something holding it on. And then for the small drill bit, I'm going to take 0.5 brass wire and make there's little cleats in the ground to hold the aproning for the barbed wire. Yeah, so I'll show you that when we get to that point. But for now, I'm just drilling in the posts. And I will show you. So yeah, pin vise just allows you to hold it there, and I'm just pushing, not very hard, and you screw it out, and there it is. Part I'm going to make the little steel cleats that go in the ground for the aproning, and I'm going to use this brass wire, which is 0.5, and again, another really useful modeling tool. So get lots of different kinds of wire, and this brass is good because brass is a little bit harder than copper, but this is still quite soft, but when you start working with it, it gets a bit harder, which is good. It's a little tougher. Copper can tend to be soft. And what I'm going to do, this is what I was looking for. I'm going to move this way a bit. I'm going to use these round nose pliers just to make round shapes with them. And then another good tool to have in your inventory is a good pair of side cutters. And then I'm just going to cut this sucker. Actually, I'm going to make it a little different. You can also, with these round nose pliers and this wire, make those, you know, those little barbed wire obstacles that look like this, and it's just a matter of twisting it around. Oops. Like so. And then you just straighten it out and snip them off. The thing is, I'm not doing it like that because what I'm going to use for my wire, it would be too difficult to run it through, but you can buy some of that Wargamer wire stuff. I imagine that would be easier to run through the little holes, but of course those little loop-de-loo metal things were very common for barbed wire obstacles as well. So I'm going to need for these about 8 of these little cleats. And I think they actually use like something very similar to this. They just stuck in the ground and then they wrap the wire through. I'm just snipping off some of the excess. So it's pretty easy, and I'm not being very picky about how these are done. So this is 0.5 wire, and I think I used a 5.5 drill bit just to make it exact. It's a very big dick. You just want to jam it in without too much hassle. And I'll make the holes for this a little bit deeper, because these are going to be crazy glued in. And basically they just go in the center of these, and I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm going to put it close to the edge. Use pen instead of pencil. These like Sharpie pens are really good to use. Try to come up a bit higher, or maybe I'll bring my camera back here again. Okay, so just eyeballing it center, and eyeballing it to the center. Except the thing isn't writing anymore. Center. So I'm putting it in between each post, like in the middle, and that's how you get that sort of zigzagging, deadly looking shape that they had. And then I'm just going to use this to drill it out. You got to be more careful with these smaller drill bits, otherwise they'll break. And I'm going in at a bit of an angle, so I'm going to come down straight initially and then turn it in at an angle. Right, so we've glued all of these together, so we've got the wooden pieces for our Spanish riders. So these will be set aside for now, because the way my cat is freaking out down here, you might be able to hear him. I don't know why he's freaking out. It's not snack time yet, Tony. He's like, Papa needs to eat. Alright, so where was I here? Yeah, next step will be to base the bases and then paint everything. Because that's how we're going to get the wire wrapped around this and glued down to the base. Otherwise, we would have to like fiddle. But you'll see as we go on what I'm talking about. So then all that's left for this first part is to glue in our posts into these. And I'm going to make like a crater in the middle of this one that's going to be blown apart. So we just take our thing, make sure that, so when we did our grooves, we did one really close to the top, about 1 millimeter, and one 2 millimeters from the bottom. The one that's 2 millimeters from the bottom is the one that's going to go into the ground. So I just stick it like so, and then we're just going to stick it with a little drop of glue, and the capillary action is just going to go around. And what we want is for our grooves that we sawed in with the saw to be pointing to the outside, so that when we put our wire in, we could just stick it in these grooves with some crazy glue. The wire that I'll be using is just aluminum mesh, so it's very thin. If you're using, there's commercially available barbed wire that you can buy. I think it's much thicker, probably a little out of scale for 15 mil. So if you're using that, you totally can use that, but you'll have to make your grooves a bit wider. So you might need to use a file of some kind instead of a saw. So, and I'm not being too picky. I just want them straight up, but not like on a super steep angle. As long as they're reasonably straight up, though, they don't need to be like perfectly straight. Obviously, they were hammered into the ground, and the ground moves and whatever. So, and same with these wire things. So the next step will be to put the groundwork down, and then paint it, and then we're going to paint the wire separately, and then wire it up after everything. After everything's painted. So I'm just going to, you don't need to see me put all of this in. I'll show you how I glue in the crazy glued parts next, but first I'll get all these ones done. And we'll move it up a bit. And I'm just going to stick those in the holes I drilled in, like so. And there's another one here. And like so. That one wants to be a dick for some reason. So they fit pretty snug, and what I'm going to do is just add some of the glue after. There's going to be groundwork going around this, so just some of this good quality crazy glue, just a little, fuck that. Okay, so for the final piece, we're going to use some of this Tamiya 2-part putty, and I'm just going to build up like a blast crater for this one that's blown apart using the Tamiya putty. And then we'll let it all dry. We're going to put the groundwork on the bases and move on to painting. You don't need to see me squish putty together, but I'll show you the crater once it's done. It's more like an armature for the crater. I'll still put lots of groundwork on it. Yeah. I've taken the Tamiya 2-part epoxy and made like the armature for my shell crater in the middle of the barbed wire. And I stippled it with this brush, which is kind of a rough bristle. I'm going to cover it with groundwork, but in case any of it's exposed through the bottom, it's going to look like dirt. And also, when you're using this putty, make sure you have water, and like these are, again, dental and sculpting tools are important to have. And just keep the tools wet, and then it won't stick to the actual putty, because this putty can be quite sticky and it can make you say really bad words sometimes. So that's that, and I've just left it on this stainless steel scoop to dry because it overlaps a bit, so then I can just bust it off when I need to once it's dry. And the other thing I would mention too, when I glued these together, I use crazy glue to put the middle section in, because if you glue these with like plastic cement and then hit it again with another dose of plastic cement to put this on, it's going to melt this bond, and then the whole thing's just going to fall apart, and again you'll probably swear. So if you use crazy glue, these things don't come apart, and then they glue together quite easily. A lot of this kind of tricky stuff is a lot to do with, you know, how you do things and put it together and so forth, and then it's not quite so tricky. We are back. We let these dry overnight so that these posts are nice and glued in. So the next step will be to put the groundwork on, and I'm going to show you how to do that, or I'm going to show you a way of doing it. There's many kinds of groundwork. You can buy products that are just like you just jam on, but I have my own, which I think is pretty good, so I'll show you. Okay, I'm going to show you the materials I use for groundwork. So this stuff is called celluclay, and it's a paper mache product. I bought this in Michael's or White Rose back when we had White Rose. And this bag of celluclay, so I don't have the bag anymore, I just throw all that shit in a coffee tin because it's easier than trying to pick it out of a fucking bag. So it's about the size of a 1 kilo coffee bag or something. And when you open it out, it kind of expands out. But I've had this stuff since the early 90s, and it's not even close, it's not even like halfway done. So this shit lasts forever. And yeah, it's like a paper mache. So you'll see what, if you haven't, you might have used this before, but if not, you know, you're going to get to see how this looks out. But I think this stuff, you know, back in 1992, it was probably about $10. It's probably a little more expensive now. So I make a little mix. The next, this is just a jar of beach sand that I got from my favorite beach, local to here. And you know, there's no exact dose. I'm just going to pour some in just to give it some texture. And then this is just model railroad ballast. You could use coarser sand or whatever. I just got this because I like the color variation that it gives me. And then what I do is add a gob of this. This is Liquitex ceramic stucco. So it's acrylic gel, but it has like a pumicey kind of, it's almost like that basing stuff that you can buy, except it has no color. And I just put a gob of that in because it is acrylic, so what it'll do is it'll make the paper mache have a more plasticky finish when it cures, which is nice. And it does have a further, even finer texture than the beach sand. Then what I do is I add my color in, so I have to do less painting. I'm going to do the base of these a little lighter than my other ones, because the other ones were quite dark, and the barbed wire is quite dark, so I felt like there's not a lot of contrast. The barbed wire is kind of hidden. So I just put a glop of this paint in. I used some country maple deco art. I just use these crappy like craft acrylics for doing all of my scenery, because I find it gives you like a slightly different color palette for your scenery, so everything doesn't look like your tanks and infantry. And then I just jam in, I'm going to put in a little touch of gray because I don't want any of my browns to be too warm on the ground. So like maybe a glop of gray. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of water, and we're going to make it kind of like sticky oatmeal. So I'm just going to go and do that, and then I'll be back. Yeah. So I've got a couple different sculpting tools. I may use this, I may not. This one's the best. Let me get some more light on the scene. This one, it has sort of like a hockey stick kind of end, and then more like a scoop on the other end. I find, especially for doing like miniatures where you're getting around the feet and things, like this is really helpful for putting this down. So we'll start with my bombed out crater first. Just going to take a glop of that and just jam it on and just start to move it around and keep it going until you sort of get the texture that you want. Now I've textured up the sides of this shell crater too, so I'm going to leave some of the original sticking out, and also I've put like sort of like some little impacts in the middle, so I'll leave those visible as well. And what you want to do is sort of pat it down in a way that you don't end up with like a lot of peaks in your groundwork, because then your shit looks like a bowl of fucking mashed potatoes. And we don't want our scene, our groundwork, to look like mashed potatoes. Unless, of course, you really love fucking mashed potatoes. But this isn't fucking mashed potatoes, is it? It's a geeky fucking terrain piece. So, yeah, we're going to make it look good, not dumb. Good and dumb. So just patting this down and moving it around. And then when, the flat ones are going to be much easier. I thought I would do the more challenging one first. And, infantry is more challenging. But I managed to do it without getting any of the paint or the groundwork on the figures, because they have the bases sort of stuck down. And I just put, when I'm doing figures, I use like the smaller thing, and I'll just scoop on smaller bits. But there's, less area to sort of fill into. The bigger areas, see with this you can sort of spread it around quite well too. Yeah, when I'm putting this stuff on bases with figures, I don't use the big knife. I use like the little sculpting tool. I'm just using this now because I have such big areas to cover. So rather than spending hours doing it, we're just going to jam this on. The basing material dried, and then I just painted the bases and the wood. I'm going to pre-paint the barbed wire sections that are going to get glued in, and then I'm going to use crazy glue, so wherever there's any sort of glossy residue from the glue, I'm just going to go over with matte varnish later. So I'm just going to put a bit of like flocking material on, just this like fine sort of flocking material, just because if I put like bushes or grass, like static grass, the wire material is so thin that it will be influenced by those things. So I'm just going to leave the flocking very basic, and it's going to be pretty busy with the wire anyway. And then after I get the wire, I might put a few like small, like little planty, bushy type things in. So that's for these ones. For flocking, I just put a couple different colors in a bin like this with a lid and just leave it like that. And then I've used my golden soft gel, golden acrylic gel. It's really good as an alternative for glue. And I've just put some in my little paint palette thing and watered it down. You can go quite watery with it. Quite watery. Just going to move that aside for now, and I'm just going to put it on in a fairly random sort of way. I'm going to leave the area under the wire a little bit less busy, so that, again, I found the ones that I did before the ground, my groundwork was a little too dark for that wire, so I want the wire to stand out a little more. And again, I don't get too worried about the ground being slightly different. What I've done for continuity is just use the similar gray. I always mix gray and brown for the ground of whatever shade. So I just made sure I used the same gray and then a lighter brown. And so, you know, the water table on the ground is, in reality, it's different. So it's not such a big deal if a portion of it's darker and then a portion right beside it is lighter. We see this naturally occurring. So and again, that's why I don't like something like this too. You go crazy if you try to do like 20 of these at a time, because they are time consuming. They just look cool as hell. That's why, rather than just buying like the generic sort of barbed wire things that are available in stores, like I like to build my own. So yeah, I'm just going kind of random with this, and then I just plunk this in and just shake it around, get the flocking material on, and then just tap it off. And there you have it. Hopefully it's lit enough for you guys to see. I'm just going to take it to my window and blow off some of the excess stuff, and then do the other, there's the other two pieces. Okay, for the Spanish riders, I've done the base with like rubble, because I'm going to use these in like urban areas, like destroyed towns or whatever. I'll actually keep it in the camera. So these aren't glued down yet. I'm going to wrap the wire around these and then adhere this to the base. So the rubble is stuff I made at home. And okay, so now I'm going to start cutting out my wire. I just use this aluminum mesh that you can get at the craft stores. I think they use it for paper mache armatures. It'll be in with the sculpting stuff. And then you just cut out strips along the mesh, and hopefully you can see this in the camera, but it, you know, from a distance, it's pretty convincing barbed wire. I think it's more convincing than the stuff that's just a bunch of little knots tied in the wire that you buy. And I think it's really good for a 15mm scale. It is quite fine. it'll break pretty easy, and it's kind of a pain in the ass to paint, but I'm going to see if I can't figure out like a better way of painting this. So first steps is to cut all of this wire out that I'm going to need. What I did to paint the wire is I just took this, it's a cookie sheet on one side, cookie sheet, and then I just taped the wire down and hit it with some brown spray paint, and then I flipped it and did the other side, and that was a bit faster. And then if there's any little aluminum parts later, you can always just touch it up with paint, or sometimes I just leave on the odd one. Yeah, it's not a big deal. In this case, I'm going to use this here Sharpie as my form to wrap the wire around. I want it a little bit narrower going across the Spanish riders and the stuff I'm jamming in the middle of the double apron things. So what I'm going to do is take the piece, turn it upside down like this, so that the smaller area is against it, and it rests pretty well against the Sharpie, as you can see. And then I'm going to use some longer strands for this one. Yeah, when you cut this off, if the wire's broken or something, use your longer pieces for these riders, because it'll just be easier in the end. So what you do is you just jam it over carefully, being careful not to break the wire. I'm not doing a good job with that particular step here. Getting it started is the most challenging, but then once you get it there, it's much easier. I ended up redoing this one just because the wire did look extra bushy compared to the other ones. So yeah, sometimes I let things slide. It might seem a little OCD, but I thought I went through the trouble of making the bases and the armatures look so good, so I might as well, just fix it while I still can. And of course, when I did it this time, it was a lot easier than last time, just because it was on camera. So yeah, I'm just going to pull this off and stick it down. But that's a good thing to remember. Make sure that your form that you're going to do your coiled wire around is the right diameter. And I also might add, like, all of my stuff is 15 mil that I'm working on. But I mean, you could translate this to 20 mil or 28 mil, 54, whatever. There's so many crazy scales out there now, 10 mil, fuck, everything. So you can adapt it to the scale that you're using. And if you're getting down to like 10, 6 mil, you probably don't even need this kind of wire. You could just use any kind of wire and it'll look legit, as long as it's nice and coily, So yeah, now that this is on, I'm just going to carefully pull it off the armature. And that part is satisfying. And then you end up, yeah, see, like that, to me that looks like a lot more, that looks better to me. So I'm going to stick that down, and then we'll move on to the squirrely piece. Put a little bit of glue on the actual piece here. Maybe that will have a more desired effect. Not really. It's actually in there, so now I'm going to get some of my accelerator and just jam it on like that. I'm just going to jam this in here, so then there's the first piece is adhered. And now the first part and the part on the bottom is the hardest. They get easier as you go closer to the top. Just going to stick that piece down in that piece. I'm going to use a bit of the accelerant. And a bit of the accelerant. And the grooves, you know, they create a little seat for it, but they also help you to hold it in place as you're doing this stuff. I might even go a little bit next level overkill and just add a bit more of this. Press it down with a dental tool. Crazy. You make me crazy. You make me want to drink or punch something inanimate, of course. Might even be a good idea to have a non-sentient item for punching close by when you do this. Yeah. So there's that side. I'm not going to make you sit through all of this. I'll finish the other side and then I'll show you how I wrap the little apron things around the sides. The deal with the aprons is you got to just start with one post at a time. So I'm going to start with the end post. Right on the top, we're going to jam on some crazy glue. Again, we're going to straighten out the piece here that we need to put on so that it's not all wrinkly looking. Barbed wire doesn't have to be perfect, as it does come off a roll in reality, and I've actually set up barbed wire obstacles before. It's like the real deal. It is a pain in the ass to work with, just like it is this stuff. So I'm just going to glue this right onto the top of the wood. And just wait for that to dry. The accelerator speeds it up quite a bit. Sorry, I keep pulling this one. I pull this closer. How about that? Get the light a bit better. So then I put these little cleats in the ground that these will pass through, and that's kind of like how the real deal does when they issue barbed wire to the people putting it in. It's often engineers, but sometimes infantrymen. You get like little cleats for like hammering down end pieces and jamming in the ground. Often you get lots of lengths of angle iron that's spiked, that's actually made specifically for barbed wire posting. In this case though, we've just gone with natural wooden posts, which would be made. So see, I've just passed it through this, and now I'm going to glue that piece up to the top. It's probably not the easiest to see in the camera, but I've put it down, put it through the cleat, and then pulled it back towards the post, and then we just give it a little dab of glue, and we're going to just glue that on. And I'm pulling it a little bit taut, but just be careful not to break the wire. Get some of my accelerator. You can always fix the shape of the wire too after it's all done. So I put that down, and now we're just going to carefully bend it back down towards the cleat, and you can see we're getting our sort of apron happening. We're just going to pull that up and glue that down. I'm not used to doing this. It's so much harder to do this shit under a camera. I really appreciate people doing these videos online because they're really helpful and really great, but my God, trying to do all this and keep it under the camera, and I can't even tell if it's in focus. I just have my little view fucking thing on the camera. But yeah, I've put it on and now I'm just pulling it a bit closer, and then I'm just gonna take it out. And then you get a fairly nice uniform coil, like it's literally come off a coil, which is what it does. And so I just want to drop it in between the fencing here, and I gotta kind of piss around to get it in. So yeah, I want to save these little bits because I have my blown up shit, and I want to put those little bits on to look like blasted off shit. So I actually don't have that much wire left. Here's hoping I can fill the remainder of the space with what I have. Because it is a pain in the ass to paint this. This whole barbed wire scam I have going on is a pain in the ass from beginning to end, but my god, it looks so good when it's done. It looks so much better than a lot of the things that are like available on the market. It's like, oh, here's barbed wire. It's like, I don't know, it looks kind of crappy. This, however, does not look crappy. It just makes you feel the rage a little bit. But having, I've done this for quite a few years now, and if something starts to really get on your nerves when you're working on it, my advice to that is just stop. Just stop, do something else, pick it up a day or two later, and it'll be much better. Stop before you get it to a point where you can't fix it. And eventually, if you stick at it, you'll have a success story. It's just some success stories involve a lot of swearing. Tony, you're getting really vocal about dinner time, pal. I'll get you situated soon. So I'm going to jam that in there. Yeah, I think it'll do. It doesn't go right to the end, but it's enough. And barbed wire tends to be a little squirrely in real life anyway, because the damn shit, as soon as you pull it off the coil, it's all under tension and it goes all squirrely in every which way. It really is nasty shit. It's actually easier to take it down than put it up. Taking it down, you just blow the shit out of it. Just put some explosive in it. See you later, barbed wire. But man, putting this stuff up, that's a different story. Okay, so I did my touch up with the paint and used the matte varnish where all the crazy glue parts were, and then you end up with your wire obstacles. And again, it's not something that you're going to mass produce or else you'll go crazy probably. But, when I'm making infantry or whatever, when I got bases out and whatever, I just freaking start a few and just plug away at them. And then over time, you just start to accumulate a bunch of them. Yeah. I'll also do some stills to show you. There's the Spanish riders on like a rubble base. Yeah, I'll do stills. The way I did made the plastic rod look like wood turned out really well. So the stills will probably show that better. And you can also use like chunks of old sprue or whatever and use the same method to make like signposts and unditching logs for tanks and telephone poles. And I mean, you could just use wood dowels too, but it's so much easier to, if you want a particular diameter of wood, to just grab it, and again, you're able to glue it with, plastic glue instead of having to mix different kinds of glues to get things done. So yeah, I'll show you the stills, and otherwise that's it for making barbed wire.